Welcome back everyone, me again, Maximus. We are doing some more military equipment review, and today's vehicle is rather interesting. It is a scout car that you may have seen in a lot of video games, movies and such, and it's almost a classic in some regard. It's an odd looking vehicle, I must admit, but it is something that is quite formidable and has some quite interesting history to it to bring it into the modern day period of which it's still being worked on and modified today. Today, folks, we are talking about the BRDM series of vehicles and the little scout car that looks like, I guess, the TARDIS on wheels. It's a rather funky looking vehicle, but I've always been quite fascinated with it because you do see it on a lot of video games and things and you're like, I really don't know much about it. Is this thing capable? What can it do? So today we're going to look at it, and I want to make it very clear that I'm not a subject matter expert, so I'm only going to take information from public accessible sources. So if I make any mistakes, please let me know in the comment section below. So, the first BRDM vehicle, the BRDM-1, entered service in the Soviet Army in 1957. It had been accepted for use by the military that year and was very quickly put into production during the Cold War era. The primary focus was to get as many of these vehicles made as possible to allow for a forward scouting reconnaissance element for Soviet armored brigades back in that time period. The BRDM vehicles were specialist armoured fighting vehicles designed purely for reconnaissance work. Now, there were a lot of different specialist variants of this particular vehicle, however its primary role was for reconnaissance, especially during the Cold War period, and the USSR really wanted to export these vehicles to as many customers as possible, especially the Warsaw Pact allies. Infantry combat vehicles and battle tanks often did the same sort of work in that kind of time period, to punch holes through massive defensive lines. However, they had to actually see where those defensive lines were. They needed a scout car that could go just about anywhere very, very quickly and at least have some sort of armored protection to allow it to get into a zone and out of a zone fairly quickly. The four-wheel drive or off-road capabilities had to be perfect. Considering that it was a reconnaissance vehicle, it needed to be able to get just about anywhere. That included water. Infantry combat vehicles and battle tanks were very, very capable of doing this too. T-72 had its own variant to be able to basically snorkel across rivers, and the same for the BMPs. However, they were quite heavy and cumbersome in crossing across rivers. The BRDM was very quick at deploying across any kind of water feature, and was very, very capable of going off-road. This made it absolutely perfect for going into reconnaissance roles. As with any military function, having specialist equipment like this designed for the purpose of actually doing reconnaissance ensured that the battle groups were able to see well ahead and actually have a better understanding as to what they're about to go up against. The BRDM-1 was really the first reconnaissance vehicle to enter the Soviet service since the Cold War. There was a BRDM-1 variant that was really open-roofed as a vehicle mostly, making it very light but leaving the crew exposed. In 1958, an enclosed roof was added to provide the occupants with shelter from their enemies and adverse weather conditions, which, being that it was the Cold War and a lot of different, European and Eastern Bloc environments during that sort of time period, it was cold, wet and miserable, and being a crew with an open top is not a good time, I can tell you that much. Having first-hand experience of training with armoured fighting vehicles in Poland, it's not a great time. The BRDM-1 did have a 5-man crew. There was a commander, a driver, and 3 other soldiers accompanying them. It did have a left-hand side drive vehicle, and the commander took on the other front seat. The remaining crew fitted in the compartment behind them. The BRDM-1 had 2 sets of 4 wheels. The 4 large wheels provided 4-wheel drive for better traction, acceleration, and handling. It was important in a vehicle that was often expected to work off-road and in difficult conditions. It also needed to, however, move very quickly across broken terrain and gather the information. To do that, there is an extra 4 sets of wheels placed onto the vehicle's, breaching point between the 2 wheels. The 4 smaller wheels sat between the main axles and they held off the ground using different types of hydraulics that were lowered only when needed. When deployed, they improved the vehicle's performance in crossing ditches and ravines and moving about off-road. One of the primary features that really shines out for me on this vehicle was the fact that it was amphibious. Both the BRDM-1 and BRDM-2 were completely amphibious and able to pretty much turn into a rolling boat. A single jet of water was used to propel them through rivers and lakes, and a ballast to the front of the vehicle allowed them to plow through the water a lot easily. There have been many experiences and instances of these vehicles not being able to continue floating and filling up from some sort of damage or, leak. However, for the most part, they're quite buoyant and didn't have much problems in traversing landscapes or water features that had quite a bit of rough turbulence on them. They could get right through it. Being that it was the Cold War, there was the risk of use of chemical weapons. Systems were built into the BRDM-1 that could detect radiations from nuclear weapons and the agents used in chemical weapons. While it could gather information on the presence of those threats, it could not protect really the crew from them, as it lacked nuclear, biological and chemical protection systems. The weapon systems on this vehicle were fairly primitive, and it was quite common for reconnaissance vehicles of this time period to have these kind of primitive weapons. The standard weapon on the BRDM-1 was a 7.62mm SGMB machine gun, which was mounted on the front of the roof. The vehicle carried 1,250 rounds for it. 2 firing ports at the rear and 2 on each side allowed the crew to fire small arms out of the vehicle also. The guns fitted to the BRDM-1 were sometimes changed though. The standard gun could be moved to the rear, and a heavier 12.7mm DSHKM or Dishka machine gun was mounted in its place on the front. There were very different variants of this vehicle put into place, some more complex than others. There was the anti-tank weapon systems that could be placed on top of these vehicles also. Considering they were reconnaissance elements, they did have the ability to shoot and scoot a couple of ATGMs onto tank formations and then run out of position. One variation on the BRDM-1 was the BRDM-1 RKHB. It was a reconnaissance vehicle specifically designed for dealing with threats from non-conventional weapons. It had a nuclear, biological and chemical protection for its crew. The sensors on the standard BRDM-1 were improved to allow it to detect those nuclear chemical threats in deployed areas. Alarm systems were also fitted, including marker poles with pennants, which could be used to raise the alarm and tell nearby troops about chemical or nuclear hazards. The BRDM-1 had a maximum speed of around 80 km an hour on road. It also could cross trenches up to 1.22 meters wide and a vertical obstacle of up to 0.4 meters high. The BRDM-2 was introduced in the 1960s. The BRDM-2 was an improved reconnaissance vehicle based on the original platform. Unlike the BRDM-1, the 2 had a turret. It was manually operated and could hold 1 person. The engine was also improved on the BRDM-2 and had a much more powerful system. It was mounted at the rear of the vehicle where previously it had been at the front. The firepower of this vehicle was improved significantly to be potentially an infantry support vehicle too. However, even with the heavier machine gun on top, it still provided the primary role as a reconnaissance element across battlefield spectrums. The welded steel of the BRDM models had a welded steel plate configuration that was very simplistic. However, it was a reconnaissance vehicle and therefore didn't really need heavy armor on the side of it. The more armor you add to a vehicle, the slower and more cumbersome it becomes. It was fairly protective against most light arm fire and small arms fire, but when it came to indirect fire or heavy direct fire from weapon systems such as, infantry fighting vehicles or tanks, it didn't stand a chance. The BRDM-2 had the armament that was fitted to the turret and specifically consisted of a 14.5mm KPVT machine gun with a telescopic sight and a smaller 7.62mm PKT machine gun mounted to it also coaxially. The vehicle carried around 500 rounds for the KPVT and around 2,000 for the lighter gun, giving the BRDM-2 a little bit more firepower when it came to getting into contacts. However, really it needed to just go and get a position, find it and bail out there as quickly as possible. Each side of the BRDM-2's hull and single firing ports of the crew had the ability to use small arms against nearby enemies, although in grand scheme of things it was absolutely redundant because it didn't really get close enough for them to be used, and if you were being engaged that close you're already being found and they're probably going to destroy you anyway. The BRDM-2 kept the 2 sets of the 4 wheels that had been given to its predecessor for its strong off-road capability. They were further improved by a central system to regulate the tyre pressures. The BRDM-2 also did have an improved nuclear, biological and chemical protection suite. It also had infrared driving lights and searchlights, enabling it to carry its work out in the dark, which being in a reconnaissance element is pretty handy. As with the BRDM-1, there was a variant of the BRDM-2 designed for specifically being in a nuclear, biological and chemical hazard environment, which was really kind of, to send in after the nukes or after the chemical attacks to see what was left, which is pretty scary stuff. This system had additional sensors and warning systems to alert nearby troops that any risks that were discovered. Later models were more lightly armed with the 7.62mm PKT machine gun, replacing the 14.5mm KPVT for extra optics and other kind of sensors. In terms of crossing obstacles, this thing was very, very good at off-road capabilities, whether in snowy conditions or just crossing ravines. The overall armour capability of the BRDM-2 was 7mm. The nose plate had a tougher 40mm armour and the belly had a 2 to 3mm armour plate, with the front of the hull being only 5mm in thickness. This made it a little bit more effective by its steep angles placed along the sides of it. There were many different upgrades of this variant also. The BRDM-2 was a modernised version. There are actually several upgrades with this kind of designator. All of them have the original gasoline engine replaced by a diesel engine and 6 MB smoke grenade discharges on the back of the turret. Also fitted with some BTAE R80 style turrets, some new wheels, GPSs and all the other gizmos and gadgets that you would expect with more modernised versions. The version that was selected by the Russian Armed Forces made its way into many different militaries around the world. All models have engine exhausts on the right hand side of the vehicle only. The BRDM-2UM was a command and control vehicle without a turret. It carries the radio equipment and field commanders in the crew compartment as well as a generator. The anti-tank vehicle was also modified with different types of anti-tank missiles that could be deployed in and out of the hull very quickly. This includes the Faggot missile and the Konkurs missile. The vehicle has participated in several wars. It took part in the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Those vehicles, as well as the derelict ones, were restored back up to working state and are now actually used by the Afghan National Army. BRDM-2 armoured scout cars were also used during either the Six-Day War, the War of Attrition, or the Yom Kippur War, by either Egypt or Syria. During one of these conflicts, Israel managed to capture a number of BRDM-2 armoured cars. The BRDM-2 had also been in service with the Iraqi army during the Gulf War and the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The BRDM-2 armoured scout cars were used during the 10-Day War and the first operations in Croatia during the Croatian War of the War of Independence with the Yugoslavian People's Army, and against the KLA during the Kosovo War. Well everyone, that is the military equipment review of this beautiful little scout car over for now. However, I have some rather interesting news which I think you're going to really enjoy about an upcoming video game release and the sponsorship program that is coming to actually continuing to get this game up and running in the near future. Now, the news I'm about to tell you is about an upcoming video game that I have actually done a video on in the past of the reveal trailer of Escalation 1985. This is a game that has been in the making for some time, and I've been in kind of communication with the developers for a long time now, and they're still working very hard to get up and running. The game is based around, obviously, the Cold War between the Warsaw Pact and NATO. It is a tactical combined arms shooter and tank simulator, and if you want to go check out the website, I have put it in the description box below. The game is powered by Unreal Engine, and as I said, it's got quite a bit of work to do until it gets there. However, they've got some serious progress being made, and I'm going to start sharing some information and some screenshots of the game through this video, but I'd really like you guys to pay attention to something that is really cool. Now, Escalation 1985 have started a program where they wish to crowdfund the game into production, so much to the point they're actually willing to give away a real BRDM-2 armoured vehicle. Yes, and let's just take a little bit more of a, I guess, overview of what they're thinking of doing. So, you know, we all know of the BRDM and its capabilities, but now you can actually be the commander of your very own Warsaw Pact armoured vehicle. Below there is a gallery of pictures from our partner Mortar Investments from an earlier restoration project of a BRDM-2. The vehicle will be demilitarized, have all the parts restored to mint condition, and have both interior and exterior painting job done. Please do check with obviously your local authorities if you're able to register it for road driving. In most US states and EU countries, it's entirely legal to drive. The vehicle will be shipped to your destination in an ISO container, and when it arrives, the founders of Icebreaker Interactive will join you and celebrate the new status of your APC as a commander. An entire business can be started with this vehicle for events, parties, hunting, fishing trips, or whatever you have. The scroll run will be a lot more exciting for the kids with their friends as well. Let's just have a little look at this thing, and just before we go down, it also says don't worry if you can't afford it, the Patreon campaign will be running in parallel and your lifetime pledges on Patreon will be matched the nearest tier of this page. Patreon also has some unique specials you might find here, so we'll check over the Patreon in a second, but these are the kind of packages that they're offering right now. So enlisted, so I guess $39, you get a copy of the game upon release, digital download of the official soundtrack, your name in the credits, a lot of different options here for crowdfunding the game, private first class, and it goes down and down and down. We've got all sorts of cool packages. all sorts of different interesting things here. I would strongly suggest you go check out their site. You know, you get there's some really cool things here. You get a in-game L3A1 bayonet. That's amazing. The British Army bayonet. I actually own one of these, so that's really cool. You get a in-game wood furniture for the L1A1, an absolutely fantastic self-loading rifle. So this is some really cool stuff here, folks. There's a lot of different reward packages. Let's get to the one that is really the most important, that we're really kind of focusing on here, because at the end of the day, owning a BRDM2 would be a pretty damn cool to have. So here we are. To actually fully fund this program, to be entered into getting this vehicle, you would have to become the General Secretary. It's a $35,000 program. And of course, many of you probably wondering, Maximus, that is a lot of money. And of course, when you're developing a game, they're not cheap to start. They're not cheap to get going. And this is something that is really for those who are an advocate to seeing a game like this succeed. And I myself, if I had the money, would love to. However, this is really kind of a, progressive crowdfunding program, which, of course, if you contributed enough monthly payments to be able to fill this kind of, reward category, then there you are. There is a ton, an absolute ton of different options and, benefits you're going to get, not only with the game, but obviously you're going to get the physical vehicle. Now, you'll get a freshly restored, low-mileage, real-life BRDM2 armored vehicle in mint condition delivered to your door, either in the United States or the EU. Be the commander of your very own Warsaw Pact armored vehicle. Here is the vehicle. It looks absolutely beautiful, very crisp, very clean. There's the interior here. There you go. It looks really, really nice. I would love to have this vehicle in my own inventory if I had the money. I'm definitely going to be subscribing to their Patreon and trying to get this game up and running. I have a huge fascination for people who wish to make games that are around the kind of Cold War period, and it's going to be fun. I guarantee you it's going to be fun. When I get more information and footage and potential gameplay of this game, trust me, I'm going to be promoting it. I have a huge respect for the game developers who have made this game. They are definitely going all out for this thing. Really, really interesting. I can't wait to see it. So, here it is, folks. You could actually own one of these vehicles if you actually were able to crowdfund, and even, a cumulative crowdfund towards this game, Escalation 1985. I can't wait to see this, this game come into play. I can't wait to see the winner of this thing. I'm sure they're going to announce it. But guys, if you want to support Escalation 1985, I would strongly encourage you to do so. The developers have been really good to me. They've, given me a lot of information. They've given me a lot of sort of background as to what they're looking for in the game. I think it's going to be a really, really fun game. There's a lot of potential there, but they need to get some support behind them to get going. It's not like, you can just make a game out of nothing. There's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of man hours, technology that goes into making games, and I can guarantee you the kind of information that they've been giving me about this game, it's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, just looking at some of the screenshots here, there's all sorts of interesting, cool stuff coming up here. We got anti-tank missile systems, the TOW there. What else we got going on? We got, some really nice screenshots. It's definitely a work in progress. Of course, we're nowhere near the point, I think, where we can start saying this is ready to go. I think they've got, themselves have said there's a bit more work to do. But they do have their Discord here, too, if you want to go check that out. A lot of people online, too, there, actually. And, there's their Patreon page. So if you want to come search any information on Escalation 1985, please go check out their webpage, which is actually on my video description below. I would love if you go check that out. And remember, guys, you could actually own your own BRDM2. That's amazing. It looks fantastic. I wish I could own it myself. Folks, I hope you enjoyed today's video about this beautiful vehicle and the upcoming Escalation 1985 game. And I thank you all again for joining me. Hope you have a wonderful day. All the best, and bye-bye. Ha ha ha.